Now that we're done establishing our pine trees and our evergreen bows, it is now time to start working on our snowman. Now for the arms of the snowman, you might want to go in with a hard pressure, lots of ink, and make it super dark so that way it creates a contrast between the arm and the tree. It's going to make your arm a lot more visible. Beginning, I was super careful about shading near the arm and near the hat. I did that specifically so I could carefully shade around these shapes to kind of help make them pop. So let's add some shadow between the hat and the curve of the snowman's back here and around the ball of the hat to kind of give it some contrast so it almost kind of pops away from the pine tree instead of disappearing into the pine tree. Now let's add some feathery strokes around the body of our snowman. And when I say the body, I mean the head, the middle, and the base. We want to kind of have these areas established, but we don't want to go too darkly. We still want to create that illusion that we're dealing with white snow here. Let's not forget to outline those adorable buttons. Feel free to color them in if they're coal or to give them kind of like a light to medium feathered outline if they are an actual button of a lighter shade or color. You get to decide how you wish to establish these buttons. Mine are little hearts. I think I might even color them in. I'm not sure yet. And don't forget to add a stroke or two of extra line underneath the chin of your snowman and wherever the two snowballs meet. We call that a contact shadow. All right, so now that we have most of our snowman established, let's add the finishing touches like your right hand arm and use some feathery light strokes over the hills of our snow to kind of establish that there is a separation of hills between the background, midground, and foreground. Now for the arm, we are going to use a heavy pressure because we're dealing with a dark black stick. And for the hills, we're going to use a super light pressure. Like you're going to butterfly kiss the surface of your ink pen or the ball of your ink pen up against the surface of your paper and let it glide across your paper to kind of get those flowing, kind of powdery soft hills that we're kind of aiming for. Now, if you want to add an undershadow to your stick, you can see here that I added a super dark line on the underside of my branch. This is going to make your stick look more three-dimensional, so it's something that you can consider. It's not absolutely necessary, but you may choose to do this if you feel like doing so. Now, I'm not going to go too crazy with this hat here. I am going to use a series of kind of feathered curved strokes to kind of emphasize that there is some movement in the hat as it droops down, up and around the body. And I'm also going to fine tune the edges here near my arm and my snowball to help these shapes pop more from the pine tree itself. It's going to make my snowman look like a separate entity than it being part of the tree itself. So while you're doing this, make sure that you're pausing and you are looking at the picture as a whole before adding more shade or color. This will help you prevent going too dark too quickly. Now that I have officially zoomed out and you can see the picture as a whole, it really does look like that snowman has come more forward rather being attached to the tree itself. So if you're ever worried about something not separating from another shape, use contrast to get to where you need to be. Just be super careful about it. And that, my friend, is how you can create a snowman in a winter scene using pen and ink. We're going to fast forward to the end of the shading process. It's very simple. For your needles, you're going to do very short strokes. If you want more shadow in those flicky, stroked out needles of yours, you're literally just going to repeat the process until you're satisfied with that intensity of color. And the berries themselves are literally, you just add a very gentle curved stroke to the shaded area of the berry, and then add an additional layer for the darkest part of the berry. I kind of like starting with blocking in the pine needles, and then I use kind of really short, brief, diagonal, straight lined strokes for the branches. I don't really curve the branches because these branches aren't curvy. They do have a solid twig or stick-like structure. So I use a series of very short angular lines to kind of get a curve whenever necessary. This will continue to give the illusion that your berries have some sort of skeletal structure in regards to how branches are formed. Now there's a reason why I skipped forward to just doing the pine needles and the berries. This this branch-like structure is a little bit more trickier because you have to go super light with your first few strokes, and then you go back and you add shadow. Move across to your piece. Don't focus on one single area at a time. And each time you lay down your stroke or your line, make sure you're doing it in an airy, flicking like fashion. You don't want the pen to stay on the paper for too long because the paper will soak up the ink and make the line thicker. We're looking for a very thin, nimble, uh, graceful bow or branch. So in order to obtain that, you need to do very light, dainty strokes. And if you want to add shadow, then you add an additional line a little bit slower on the underside of the branch. This will really make it pop. So now that we have done our foreground or our evergreen bows, let's continue on to our pine trees because it's kind of a similar stroke except for you're doing kind of like a diagonal stroke with a curve in the middle. If you want to add some snow, you can draw in some clumps of snow first and shade around it, or you can use whiteout and dab the whiteout using the whiteout brush. Dab the snow particles or clumps on top of your drawing. It's totally up to you and it's based on your preference. Okay, now the strokes of snow that are going to be on the side of the tree are going to look more diagonal, and the ones that are facing head on towards the viewer are going to look more like blobs. Not necessarily diagonal blobs, but just clumps almost sitting like they're on a ledge. So let's quick kind of block in our snow particles if we choose to do so. If not, you can fast forward to the shading part of this video. Now that we have established where our snow is going to lay or sit upon the branches of our tree, it is now time to shade said branches. I'm going to go in at a slightly curved diagonal slant, and I'm literally going to color around the shapes that we have established on our paper. We're going to leave the snow exposed. So let's work our way down using kind of like a diagonal stroke with a slight curve or bend to the middle. And the closer we get to the center of our pine tree, it's going to turn more into like a vertical stroke because that center is looking directly at the viewer. Here I have established my first layer of value. We call this filler shade. And now I'm going to add an additional layer of lines on the areas where I want to represent the shadow. In fact, I might even just add a secondary layer to the whole pine tree itself. That way the pine tree pops against the white of the paper and the white of the snow. because I might add a layer of sky behind these pine trees, and I don't want them to disappear into the background.